WADR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar. Good afternoon and many thanks for tuning into West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and all around the world on WADR.org. This is Newslink. Here are the top stories. The Malian transitional government, through the army, denies report of the release of terrorist fighters in exchange for hostages. Guinea's Court of Economic and Financial Crimes takes its hearing to Conakry's pasture clinic as Fofana's health deteriorates. In Ghana, the government urges calm as unverified leaked audio reveals rigging plans in the 2024 elections by the ruling MPP party.
Let me make it absolutely clear that this government is not going to tamper with 2024 election.
Burkina Faso receives 1.5 billion CFA francs from Moscow to tackle humanitarian crisis ahead of Russia-Africa summit. Please stay with us for details of these stories and more.
Here is James Adjapong with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining us. We begin in Mali with one of the major discussions, which is the alleged release of fighters of a terrorist network in exchange for Malian hostages by the Transitional Authority. This curiosity among the population Tuesday prompted a press conference by the Public Relations Unit of the Malian Army in Bamako to reject the information as reported by the French media RFI. The head of the unit, Colonel Souleymane Dembélé, denied any such claim that the government released prisoners of the Islamic State group in the Greater Sahara, EIGS. For more details, here is Oge Obiarika.
Before Tuesday's press conference by the Army's Public Relations Unit, Radio France International RFI last weekend reported that the transitional authorities released prisoners from the terrorist network EIGS. The international media cited several security and diplomatic sources in reporting the incident. Denying the claim, Colonel Souleymane Dembélé queried the rationale of fighting insurgents on one hand and on the other releasing them after their arrest. I have no information concerning the veracity of this information relayed by foreign media on social networks, he continued. According to RFI, these releases benefited executives of the group, namely Oumeya Ould al-Bakhaye, arrested by the French force Barkhane in June 2022, before being handed over to the Malian transitional authorities. Dadi Ould Shehoub, better known as Abu Dada, also arrested by Barkhane in June 2021, was the second terrorist that allegedly got swapped in exchange for Sophie Petronin and Soumaila Cissé in October 2020. In addition to securing the release of the hostages, the releases were intended to establish a truce with the transitional authorities to, in particular, carry out electoral activities in areas controlled by the group, mainly in Menaka, according to the same source. Colonel Souleymane Dembélé, director of the Army Public Relations Unit, capped his address with an update on military operations in June 2023. Dembélé said at least 51 terrorists were neutralized and 55 other suspects arrested.
Oge Obiarika filed that report. In Guinea, the justice system seems to have taken the fight against corruption to a whole new level, especially in the trial of alleged corrupt officials of the former regime. On Tuesday, Ibrahima Kassori Fofana, a former prime minister and the former president Alpha Condé, was held on a sickbed at the Pasteur Clinic in Conakry. The hearing, which is the first of its kind, is part of his trial for alleged acts of illicit enrichment and embezzlement of public funds. Abdullahi Hassan completes the story.
The mobile count was decided on July 3 by the prosecutor of the Economic and Financial Offences Repression Court, CREAT, after Fofana failed to appear at the courthouse. The former Prime Minister had on several occasions failed to present himself at the CREAT for questioning since the trial opened in March this year. In a statement Tuesday evening, Dina Sampil, one of Fofana's lawyers, said the court came to see Ibrahima Kassori Fofana, interrogated him and consulted the physician about the PM's state of health. Sampil continued that Fofana could only respond with hand gestures and in an inaudible tone. Often during the hearing, the doctor was forced to repeat Fofana's statements for the court and the other parties, Sampil concluded. The hearing was suspended when a system monitoring the defendant signaled a sharp decline in his heart rate. Kassori, alongside his legal team under the physician's directive, have asked for his evacuation to a specialized center for medical attention. There is, however, no mention of whether the recommended facility is within or outside the country. Ibrahima Kassori Fofana was a prime minister from May 2018 until the overthrow of former President Alpha Conde on September 5, 2021 and subsequently arrested in April 2022. He is being prosecuted along with other former ministers by the Financial Crimes Court for corrupt practices and embezzlement of public funds.
Abdullahi Hassan with that report.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
If you are just joining us, this is Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. Remember, we are streaming all around the world on WADR.org. The Liberian Senate has convicted Public Works Minister Ruth Coker-Collins and her deputies for lying under oath during their appearance before that August body. Article 44 of the Liberian Constitution says that contempt of the legislature shall consist of actions which obstruct the legislative functions or obstruct members or officers of the parliament in the discharge of their duties. Such actions may be punished by a reasonable sanction after a hearing consistent with due process of law. The WADR's Darlington Pogba in Monrovia reports.
Public Works Minister Ruth Coker-Collins and her deputies were invited by the Liberian Senate to provide the status of the ongoing road projects undertaken by the government across the country. However, appearing before the Senate Tuesday, Collins struggled to justify why constructing roads in southeastern Liberia are deplorable.
So the contractor worked within the mobilization cost, and the contractor actually worked. Progress was made, but because of what we expected, they weren't met. We had several other meetings with the contractor that led us to termination of that contract.
The minister's presentation angered the several senators because her explanation, they say, lacks merit, stressing that the major highway in the southeast has been abandoned.
Must be held liable also for this decision. I will appeal that the entire Ministry of Public Works be sent to the common jail. Whatever punishment that this plenary would deem necessary should be applied first to the minister, the deputies, before the assistant minister. Now, considering the minister lied on her oath, she be sent to a common jail for 24 hours.
The decision to detain the minister and her deputies to common jail was met with still resistance from other senators who appealed for her to be afforded due process in line with the Constitution of Liberia.
Perjury is a crime penalized under our code, and perjury is not a matter cognizable before the legislature. It will hold its vote in contempt for something else. It cannot be perjury because it is not within the province of our jurisdiction.
The call for due process partly served as a blessing to the minister and her team as they were ordered to reappear Thursday along with their lawyers to explain why they should not be held in contempt. The inquiry months before the October 10 elections conflicts with claims by George Weah-led presidency of having constructed more roads than any other administration since Liberia's independence in 1847. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Darlington Pogba in Monrovia.
A coalition of non-governmental organizations has converged on Abuja, Nigeria's capital, for the 30th Anti-Corruption Situation Room. The two-day event, tagged National Conference on Anti-Corruption, seeks to review the anti-corruption fight of the immediate past administration of Muhammadu Buhari and to set agenda for the new administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. From Abuja, Usman Umar reports.
The conference theme is Nigeria and the Fight Against Corruption, reviewing the former President Buhari's regime and setting agenda for President Bola Tinubu is the first major gathering of stakeholders united in the fight against anti-corruption since the new administration came on board last May. The chairman of the Human and Environmental Development Agenda, Olanrewaju Suraj, thus tasked media organizations and civil society organizations to hold the government accountable in areas of governance and the justice system.
We must continue to compile some of this by saying in the next 4 years, where are we going? I mean, it is not just about rhetorics, it is not just about grammar, it's not even only just about policy, it must be the implementation and enforcement of the law.
The Nigeria director of MacArthur Foundation, Kole Shettima, on his part, urged various stakeholders to support and address challenges hindering the application of the criminal justice system in the country.
Do the investigations, do hard-hitting reports, and expose some of the malice that are happening in our society. Second aspect of the approach we take is around support for civil society groups and organizations.
The National Security Advisor, Nuhu Ribadu, represented by the Special Advisor on Legal Matters, in his keynote address harped on the need for critical stakeholders to key into the renewed hope agenda of the present administration.
The government will continue to work on the current administration, reforming the civil service to fight corruption, reduce bureaucracy, streamline agencies, decrease inefficiency and waste. We'll streamline the amount that government spends on itself, the cap we place on fiscal expenditures for the construction of government buildings and on salaries-related compensation packages of elected officials.
The National Conference on Anti-Corruption has in attendance over 30 civil society organizations and representatives of relevant government agencies and the legislature. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
In Ghana, there are widespread concerns that the government is planning to interfere with the 2024 general election. This follows a leaked audio involving a high-ranking police officer and a member of the governing New Patriotic Party, where the two are discussing how to remove the Inspector General of Police because they fear that he could impede efforts to manipulate the election outcome. While the audio is yet to be authenticated, the government has denied the allegations of election interference, describing such accusations as baseless. Our Accra correspondent, Atiawene Bella Lawson, reports.
The graphic and multimedia group, two of the most credible media houses in Ghana, have reported on the content of the leaked audio. In the 63-minute audio, two men who present themselves as a high-ranking police officer and a leading official of the ruling party are heard discussing how to rig the 2024 general election in favor of the government. They also discussed the need to remove the Inspector General of Police because they fear that he could impede efforts to manipulate the polls. Since the news of the audio broke, there has been widespread concern from civil society, election watchers, and the opposition political parties. Security analyst Adib Sani has called for an investigation of the audio to ascertain its authenticity.
We are so accustomed to brushing off issues. If we were a very serious country, what would have been commissioned is an investigation immediately.
For his part, a former senior police officer and now member of parliament for the opposition National Democratic Congress, Peter Tobu, says the persons plotting this move will create chaos during next year's general election. He's therefore warning against any such plan.
Well, it's not a matter of believing, but it's a matter of saying that whoever thinks that way is undemocratic in the brain. Because if somebody thinks that is the Ayawa election type of violence that can lead the MPP to break the 8, then it means that we don't want the Fourth Republic. Because if anything like that surfaces in the 2024 elections, our democracy problem will be gone.
Meanwhile, the government, through the Interior Minister, has described the allegation in the audio as baseless and asked the public to dismiss it. Ambrose Derry is the Interior Minister.
Let me make it absolutely clear that this government is not going to tamper with 2024 election.
Reporting for Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Atiewin Imbila Lawson in Accra.
You are listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM. Dakar, here is a reminder of our top stories. The Malian transitional government, through the army, denies report of the release of terrorist fighters in exchange for hostages. Guinea's Court of Economic and Financial Crimes takes its hearing to Conakry's pasture clinic as Fofana health deteriorates. In Ghana, the government urges calm as unverified leaked audio reveals rigging plans in the 2024 elections by the ruling MPP party. And Burkina Faso receives 1.5 billion CFA francs from Moscow to tackle humanitarian crisis ahead of Russia-Africa summit. Still ahead, we have our newspaper review, guest interview, and some sports update. Kindly stay with us.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
This is West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM. It's 15 minutes past 12 in our studios. Don't forget you can follow our discussions on Twitter and Instagram at WADR News. And on Facebook, West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. Find us on YouTube at WADR News. And on the humanitarian situation, Ouagadougou has received 1.5 billion CFA francs from Moscow to support the country's effort in providing essential services, particularly for vulnerable populations. The donation was made by the Russian ambassador to Burkina Faso, Alexei Sartikov, during an official visit to the Burkina Bay Minister of Foreign Affairs, Regional Cooperation and Burkina Bay Abroad, Olivia Ruamba. The humanitarian crisis in the Sahelian state, the preparations for Russia-Africa summit, and the strengthening of the various axes of cooperation, in particular security and defense, were top of the issues between the two officials. Addressing the issue of the next Russia-Africa summit, Minister Olivia Ruamba assured Burkina Faso's participation in this important global meeting. While reiterating Russia-Burkina Faso relations as crucial, Ruamba said the country's presence in the second summit is important for it to defend its interests in connection with the improvement of the living conditions of its population. According to earlier arrangement, the summit will hold from July 26 to 29, 2023 in St. Petersburg and will bring together 54 African countries.
This is the newspaper review. Stay on top of the news. Get the most important stories with added insight and concise review.
This is the newspaper review.
Let's cross over to Banjul with Sankole Janko for the newspaper review.
Hello there and welcome to this edition of the Press Review. Let's begin with the Point newspaper, whose lead story reads, Government vows to probe alleged U.S. visa fraud, with a photo of Ibrahim Sankare, the government spokesperson and presidential advisor. Recall, the U.S. government expelled 4 Gambian diplomats. They include Abdujam Basako Dabo, Alhaji Babu Juve, as well as the deputy mission in the Gambian embassy in Washington, Mustafa Sose. Among the crimes they've alleged to have committed include fraudulent activities and visa issues. Also, Abdujam was alleged to have assaulted his daughter. Still with the Point newspaper, ECOWAS condemns inhuman treatment in North Africa, with the photo of President Ahmed Tinubu, the newly elected ECOWAS head. Let's move on to the Standard newspaper. Majority leader defends Barrow's right to third term, with the photo of course, Billy J. Tunkara, who is the majority leader of the Gambia National Assembly, as well as Edward Snow. Edward Snow is the chairman of ECOWAS Parliament. Recall, after President Macky Sall decided not to run for a third term, Edward was among prominent politicians who led tribute to Macky Sall for his decision not to run for a third term. In that letter, Edward also urged Gambian president not to run for a third term, urging him to emulate President Macky Sall. However, the majority leader has come to defend his boss and his desire to run for a third term. Veil plaintiffs seek to drop $20 million claim from Shoot. Policeman narrates discovery of slain taxi driver's body. This other one reads, Gambia to unlock energy potentials at Mauritania Oil Conference. India strict against farms making false drugs after Gambia AKI deaths. Let's move on to the final paper for today, and that is the Voice newspaper. The Voice newspaper's lead story reads, Snapchat users plead not guilty to posting nude videos of complainant. Bakau attackers case adjourned again. Magistrate signals bail revoke. The Gambia ready to host summit, President Barrow tells OIC assessment team. And finally, GPPA director appears before local government commission. I'm afraid that these are the major stories making the headlines on Gambian dailies. And it's back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Sankole, for that newspaper review.
Politics,
Analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is A Guest.
Moscow has donated 1.5 billion CFA francs to Burkina Faso to support the provision of essential services, particularly for vulnerable populations ahead of the Russia-Africa Summit slated to hold from July 26 to 29, 2023 in St. Petersburg. Addressing the issue of the coming summit, the Burkina Faso Minister of Foreign Affairs, Regional Cooperation, and Burkina Faso Abroad, Olivia Ruamba, gave assurance of Burkina Faso's participation in the August meeting that is set to bring 54 African countries on one stage. Our guest, Dr. Margie Peters, will be sharing his view on the sustainability of the partnership between both countries, the geopolitical power play at present, and the negotiation skills Burkina Faso should employ at the summit. Will this donation and partnership with Russia defeat the ongoing ECOWAS deliberation of possible economic sanctions on Burkina Faso?
I think we're trying to rebuild the global tempo of the Cold War, and Burkina Faso is playing a mind game. ECOWAS has sanctioned them. Moscow is contending with global powers and NATO. Burkina Faso need to come back to reckoning. Moscow need to buy loyalty and allegiances. And exactly what they were doing before, going to look for vulnerable nations and courting them, is what is happening. Because the issue of non-alignment is not as strong as the non-alignment movement used to be. So right now, people are building personal relationships. A lot of countries in Africa are heading towards the Asian tigers. So the other countries who were very visible in the times of the Cold War, before the collapse of the Kremlin, are no longer as visible as they are. So we talk about bilateral relationship and people are trying to buy allegiance and loyalty. So that's the space we are. And I see that continuing for some time to come.
So, say, in your view, this defeats ECOWAS sanctions on Burkina Faso?
It does not defeat the sanction.
Okay.
But it's putting its feet in the muddy waters of diplomacy in ECOWAS. ECOWAS will still say, yes, we're not going to work with you. But what they are trying to do is bringing your enemy to your backyard, and is going to define the conversation between ECOWAS as a bloc and the Western powers who are anti-Russia. So they are playing a very good diplomatic mind game. So, it's like saying, if you say I'm not going to live in the house, let's bring the roof down. So it's a diplomatic maneuver.
Okay, so finally, Russian Foreign Minister Olivia Ruamba has assured Burkina Faso of its participation ahead of Russia-Africa Summit. As we're asking that, what would you admonish the Foreign Ministry of Burkina Faso to put across on the floor of this global meeting that will convince partners, international bodies, and stakeholders of their quest to ensure defense and protection of their civilians?
I think African nations should learn now not to go negotiating from the perspective of vulnerability. At every table of dialogue, you all have something to give, you have something to offer, you have something to take. Let's negotiate from the perspective of what we're taking as well, not what we're begging for. So I think if the engagement is going to be around strategic security, the issue of partnership for development, the issue of sustainability of relationship for growth and development, the issue of increasing livelihood, eradication of poverty, the issue of helping the state to protect sovereignty, it is to their own benefit they should go for it. So whatever works for any country, even if you need now to negotiate with a country that people feel have a lot of issues that does not contend with you and you think it will be for our own benefit, I think African nations should now start negotiating from the perspective of strength. You have so much to offer as well. We are a global market. We shouldn't just be consumers of trash.
Dr. Margie Peters is a regional security analyst. And now to some sports news. A group of amateur clubs in Cameroon has reportedly called on former Indomitable Lion legend Samuel Eto'o to resign from Football Federation as president. This comes amid grave irregularities in Cameroon Football Federation, FICAFOOT. Cameroon's Amateur Clubs Association, ACFAC, recently voted 11-1 in favor of asking Eto'o to step down from his role. The group also called on Cameroon Sports Minister to intervene, adding that he should ask FIFA President Gianni Infantino to do the same. Among the irregularities, according to the group, include changing the FICAFOOT presidential mandate from 4 to 7 years. And that is it for sports. We have come to the end of this edition of Newslink from West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening. And many thanks to our listeners in the Gambia via Hot 104.3 FM and in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM Lofa County, and in Ghana on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi. Inyas Bilimu has been on the console. Many thanks to Mustafa Sek for our Facebook live coverage. Do interact with us via our social media platforms on Twitter, Instagram @WADR News, and on Facebook West Africa Democracy Radio English Service. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is a rebroadcast of our agenda program 50/50 with Atiarin and Bilal Lawson. I am James Adjapong. Good afternoon.
News, talk, music. Get it all 24 hours on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9.